Ilara Voss had never been the kind of woman who made noise when she walked into a room. She did not wear expensive clothes, or carry herself with the confidence that came from a powerful last name. She was simply herself, quiet, steady, and completely unbothered by what other people thought of her. That quality, which most people in her world mistook for weakness, was in fact the most dangerous thing about her. She had grown up in a small pack on the northern edge of the territory, far from the grand cities and marble halls where the powerful wolves gathered. Her father had been a craftsman. Her mother had made bread every morning before sunrise. There was no title attached to the Voss name, no warriors in the bloodline, no history of power. Just honest, hard-working people who believed that respect was something you built slowly, with your hands and your character, not something you were handed at birth. So when the black envelope arrived at her door, sealed with the royal crest of the Alpha King's court, Ilara did not tremble the way the messenger clearly expected her to. She opened it, read it, set it down on the kitchen table, and finished her tea. The summons was clear. Every wolf in the 4 territories was to appear at the capital within 3 days. The occasion was called the Dominance Assembly, a ceremonial gathering that had taken place every decade for over 2 centuries. All wolves, regardless of rank, were required to present themselves before the Alpha King and kneel in a unified act of loyalty to the crown. It was tradition, it was law, and for most wolves, it was simply something you did without question. Ilara thought about it for exactly 1 night. She lay in her bed, stared at the ceiling, and asked herself one simple question. Had she ever chosen this king? Had she ever agreed to this loyalty? Had anyone ever asked her? The answer was no. And so, on the morning of the 3rd day, she packed a single bag and made the long journey to the capital. Not because she feared the consequences of staying home, but because she believed that if something was wrong, you had to be present to say so. The capital was unlike anything in her quiet northern life. The buildings were tall and dark, made of stone, that had been standing for centuries. The streets leading to the king's fortress were lined with wolves from every corner of the territory, some in fine clothes, some in simple ones, all of them moving in the same direction with the same tight expression on their faces. Nervous, obedient, careful. Ilara walked among them without hurry. The grand hall of the king's fortress was enormous. It could hold 500 people without feeling crowded, and on that day, it was full to the edges. Stone pillars lined the walls. Torches burned in iron holders above the crowd. At the far end, raised on a wide platform of dark marble, sat the throne, and on it, the Alpha King, Cain Ashford. Even from a distance he was striking, not in the way that made people smile, but in the way that made them step back. He was tall, with dark eyes that moved across the room like a man counting inventory. He wore no crown, only dark ceremonial armor and a long black coat. His expression was completely still, as though nothing in the room could surprise him, and nothing ever had. Behind the throne, pacing slowly back and forth, was his wolf. Everyone in the shifter world knew about the Alpha King's wolf. It was silver-black, massive, ancient-looking, with eyes the color of pale ice. It had been at Cain's side since before his first battle. Some elders said that the wolf was not just his animal self, but something older, a creature bonded so deeply to his soul that it reflected his truest nature at all times. When the king was calm, the wolf was still. When the king was furious, the wolf's eyes burned. That day, the wolf paced slowly, watching the crowd below with an intelligence that made people uncomfortable. It looked less like an animal and more like a judge. The ceremony began. One by one, each group of wolves stepped forward when their region was called. They walked to the center of the hall, stopped before the platform, and knelt. Some did it quickly and without drama. Some bowed their heads deeply, clearly hoping to make a strong impression. A few trembled visibly, but they all knelt. Every single one. Ilara stood near the back and watched. When the northern territories were called, she moved forward with the small group from her region. They walked together to the center of the hall. The man beside her, the closest thing her region had to a regional leader, went down immediately, one knee on the cold stone floor, head low. Ilara stopped walking. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by kneeling wolves, with her hands at her sides and her eyes straight ahead. The whispers started instantly. She heard them like a soft wave moving through the crowd. Confused, alarmed, disbelieving, people stared at her, some with shock, some with something closer to terror on her behalf. Two royal guards stepped forward from beside the platform, their hands moved toward her. Then a single hand rose from the throne. Cain's hand. Just lifted, barely, a small, unhurried gesture. The guards stopped immediately and stepped back. The hall went completely quiet. Cain looked at Alara from across that wide-open space, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke. His voice was low, but it carried perfectly through the silence, as though the room itself was shaped to deliver his words. "You do not kneel," he said. It was not a question. "No," Alara said. Her own voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "Why?" he asked. She took a slow breath. "Because I have never chosen you," she said. "I did not agree to this loyalty. No one asked. And I will not kneel before a king simply because he was born to a title, or because the room expects it of me. I will kneel before someone who has earned that from me. I have not yet seen that from you." Another wave of whispers swept through the crowd, sharper this time. Someone near the back made a sound like a sharp inhale. A few people actually leaned away from her, as though distance would protect them from what was about to happen. Cain rose from his throne. He was even taller standing. He descended the marble steps slowly, not rushing, not stumbling, with the calm deliberateness of someone who had never needed to hurry in his life, because the world had always waited for him. His dark eyes did not leave her face. The crowd parted silently on either side. No one breathed. He walked the full length of the hall and stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close, he was even harder to read. There was no fury on his face. She had expected fury. There was something else, something more careful. He studied her the way a person studies a lock they have never seen before, not with irritation but with focus. He opened his mouth to speak. And then something happened that no one in that hall, not the oldest elder, not the highest-ranking alpha, not even Cain himself, had ever seen before. The silver-black wolf behind the throne stepped forward. It moved past the platform slowly, descending the steps on its own, and crossed the hall floor toward Alara. The crowd pulled back as it passed, pressing against the walls. No one made a sound. The wolf moved without hesitation, without stopping, until it stood beside its king. And then, before Alara and 500 witnesses, the wolf lowered its enormous head. Its front legs folded forward. Slowly, deliberately, with complete stillness, as though it had made a decision and had no uncertainty about it at all. The Alpha King's wolf bowed to her. The silence in the hall became something physical. It pressed against everyone in the room. Alara stared at the wolf. The wolf's pale eyes looked up at her without blinking, calm and certain and ancient. Cain stood completely still beside it. Something moved across his face, the first thing she had seen move on that face since she arrived. It was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It was something much more difficult to name. Like a man who had just heard a sound he had never heard before and was trying to understand what it meant. No one spoke for a long time. Then Cain turned his head slowly and looked at her again. "My wolf," he said quietly, "has never done that. Not once. Not in 40 years. Alara looked at the wolf, then back at him. "I did not ask it to," she said simply. "I know," he said. And the way he said those 2 words, with a kind of quietness that was very different from the silence he had used before, made several people nearby look at the floor. He did not order the guards forward. He did not call for her to be removed. He did not raise his voice or his hand, or make any move that the crowd was clearly expecting. Instead, he stepped aside. He moved out of her path and gestured, not as a dismissal, but as an opening. She could go. She was free to walk out of that hall, unkneeled, untouched, without consequence. Alara looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned and walked toward the great doors. The crowd watched her in silence. Not one person in that hall could have explained what they had just witnessed. Not even the oldest among them had words for it. She walked through the doors and out into the stone corridor. She had barely gone 20 steps when she heard footsteps behind her. She did not speed up. She did not stop. She kept walking at exactly the pace she had always walked. "Wait," said a voice behind her. She stopped. She turned. Cain stood in the corridor, without the armor of the throne room behind him, without 500 pairs of eyes on him. He looked different out here, not smaller, but more real. Like a man rather than a figure. He looked at her carefully. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ilara," she said. "Ilara Voss." He repeated it quietly, as though placing it somewhere in his memory. "Ilara Voss," he said. Then he was quiet for a moment. "My wolf has been with me since before my first battle. It has never lowered its head to any living person, not to a queen, not to a general, not to an elder wolf older than this fortress." She listened. "It bowed to you," he said. "A woman with no title, no rank, no bloodline on record." He paused. "I would like to understand why." Ilara considered him. There was something in the way he was asking, without demand, without performance, that was different from everything she had seen in the hall. He was genuinely asking, not as a king, just as a person who had been surprised by something and was honest enough to say so. "I don't know," she told him. "I didn't do anything." "That," he said slowly, "may be exactly the point." She tilted her head slightly. "Everyone in that room did something today," he said. "They performed. They calculated. They thought about how to kneel in a way that I would notice and remember. They gave me what they thought I wanted." He paused. "You walked in and simply were what you are. No performance, no fear, no calculation." He looked at her steadily. "And my wolf, who reads the truth in things, recognized something in that." Ilara was quiet for a moment. "What did it recognize?" she asked. He did not answer right away. The silence between them was different from the silence in the hall. It was not heavy. It was more like the silence before a conversation that both people know will matter. "I have been asking myself that question for the last 5 minutes," he said honestly. She almost smiled. She did not quite, but something in her face softened enough that he noticed it. "You should go back to your ceremony," she said. "Yes," he said, but he did not move immediately. "Ilara Voss," he said one more time, as though the name itself was something he was not ready to put down. "Alpha King," she replied, not with disrespect, not with warmth, but with a clean simplicity that was entirely her own. She turned and walked back down the corridor. He stood and watched her go. And then he walked back through the great doors, back across the hall where 500 wolves were still on their knees, waiting. He climbed the marble steps. He sat back on the throne. His wolf returned to its place behind him, calm and unhurried, as though nothing unusual had occurred. But Cain Ashford sat on that throne for the rest of the ceremony, with something unfamiliar sitting quietly in his chest. A question he had not carried before that day. A question about whether the loyalty he had been gathering for 40 years, loyalty given out of obligation and tradition and fear, was the kind of loyalty that was actually worth having. He looked at the doors she had walked through. He thought about what his wolf had done. And for the first time in his very long reign, the Alpha King began to wonder if the most powerful thing a person could do was not to demand what they were owed, but to become someone worth choosing.